here's the thing. The President of the United States was treated unfairly in the House impeachment hearings. There was no opportunity for this president to have a say so. There was no opportunity for him to present witnesses. There was no opportunity for him to cross-examine other witnesses. In fact, what we saw in the House was a completely unfair process designed to create an impeachment. There was no attempt by the House to actually get to the truth of the facts. Instead, they lined up a series of witnesses based on hearsay and saying, oh, well, we think this might have occurred or it occurred in our imagination, and we believe that we should impeach because in our imagination he did something wrong. The entirety of the House impeachment exists based upon Adam Schiff's initial reading of what he said the president said to the Ukraine president Zelensky. And what Schiff did, is Schiff flat out wrote a fairy tale and read it, and then the House impeached President Trump based upon Schiff's fairy tale. The truth is, and the facts showed, there was no malfeasance by this president, and he was perfectly right in the call that he made with Ukraine President Zelensky. This was always an impeachment looking for a crime, and and they never did find one. And so the two articles don't reflect anything that even is against the law.
Okay, now, impeachment, it seems the whole thing is just trumped up, pardon my pun, as a political hit job, and it doesn't seem to really even be polling well. I've noticed it's not even trending well on Twitter. Do the American people see through this and not care?
Well, I think the American people see through it. But what I'm hoping the American people will do is they'll actually pay attention to President Trump's defense, because it'll be the first time they've actually seen in a real coordinated way a defense of this president against scurrilous charges and really 3 years of attacks on this president by House Democrats who have been determined, and as well as the Mueller probe, who have been determined to try to undermine this president. Remember, the Washington Post, 20 minutes after the president's impeachment or inauguration, which, by the way, was 3 years ago today exactly, 20 minutes after his inauguration, the Washington Post said, "Impeachment begins." Okay, so he was 20 minutes into his presidency before impeachment began, and now a full 3 years later, they have impeachment coming to the floor of the Senate. And after 3 years of intensive investigations, Frank, they have not found not a single chargeable offense that would be charged under anything even resembling a high crime or misdemeanor. I don't know any politician in history who could have stood up to the scrutiny this president has faced and still continue to do his job and do his job well. This has been a remarkable presidency in that he's faced everything but the kitchen sink being thrown at him, and he's still managed to really change the world in so many ways through trade deals and other laws, regulations being cut, taxes being cut. He has been a remarkably effective president. And imagine what could have happened if the Democrats had chosen to govern the country rather than attempting to take down the elected leader.
Yeah, you mentioned that he's had to do all this while he's had just this mass of people out to get him, and government and media and Hollywood, academia. He's managed to do pretty well as president. He's got a pretty good record. He kind of keeps a sense of humor about it. But if you go back and look, starting with that Comey testimony, and then the Russia investigation, the Mueller report, now the impeachment hearings, the whole thing has been a whole lot of nothing. All of it. They keep coming after him for things that are just wisps of smoke. And so do you think the American public are going to just stop paying attention to the Democrats after a while? It seems like they are. I mean, impeachment's not doing too well with the numbers.
I think the biggest surprise to the Democrats in all this is they control the mainstream media. 94% of the coverage of President Trump has been negative for the past 3 years. Okay, 94% of the coverage has been negative. That's a huge number. And yet, they've been unable to shake the president's base. They've been unable and are increasingly unable to move the needle in terms of the way the public perceives this president, which tells you that the public has basically said about the mainstream media, we don't trust you. And as a result, they don't have the same capacity to manipulate that they've had in the past. I think that's the big surprise, and I think the Democrats are really shocked that that's occurred. That they can sit there and they can lie about stuff. The media can repeat the lies, and the public sits there and says, "We know that's not true. We don't believe it." And the fact that the mainstream media has lost their capacity to manipulate the public is probably the big story out of the first 3 years of the president, at least the big untold story.
Now, there's one impeachment in history that strikes me as being very valid that probably should have happened, and that was when Andrew Johnson was impeached. He survived that. So if Andrew Johnson can survive impeachment, then Donald Trump can probably survive on, again, pardon me for using the pun, on trumped up charges. Donald Trump can survive. Would you say he's going to be acquitted?
Well, I think he'll be acquitted. The question is, um, will the media, will the public hear the president's case and thoroughly and completely reject the Democrats' argument? The question is, will Joe Manchin, will Kirsten Sinema, um, will they vote in favor of acquittal? The question is, um, it's not enough to just not have 67 senators vote for acquittal. This president really wants to be able to be able to dunk the ball on the Democrats, and that means him actually having a majority of the Senate saying voting for acquittal, and that's going to be. And I think he can get there. But he's going to have to make a strong, compelling case, and that's why I would encourage people to really pay attention to what happens on Friday and Saturday. It's an unusual time when the Senate works on a Friday and a Saturday. They're working on this impeachment trial on Friday and Saturday this week, because that's when the president's team is expected to make their case. And if it were me, I would make it like a closing argument. I would show the video of Joe Biden bragging about shaking down the Ukrainian government and forcing them to fire the prosecutor who was investigating Hunter Biden's company. I would show that to the senators, because I think people will be surprised to learn that many of the senators are completely unaware of that occurred. They're unaware that that's on video. They're unaware that it was on video and it was on the president's mind, and which is why he felt he had to mention Joe Biden's name and Burisma, the company that Hunter Biden was on the board. He had to mention them to Zelensky because Joe Biden was the grand poobah over U.S.-Ukraine policy and was viewed as being exempt from being investigated for corruption charges. So the president brought that up specifically because he needed to let the Ukraine government know that you can investigate wherever it takes you without the government of the United States blocking your way, the way the government of the United States had done previously.
Now, I don't know if this would ever happen, but wouldn't it be nice if we had Rudolph Giuliani testify, as he suggested he would want to testify, on how corrupt the business climate is in Ukraine, and then the next witness is Hunter Biden explaining what he was doing business in the Ukraine.
Well, my preference would have that be, let's have that testimony before the House or the Senate Judiciary Committee, not in the open floor of the Senate during an impeachment trial. Here's the thing. This president there's lots of places where we could get to the bottom of Biden's involvement in the Ukraine and whether it was legitimate or not. But the place that you shouldn't do it is when the president has a knife to his throat in an impeachment trial. If the president needs to make his case in those opening arguments. He needs to make it fully. The senators will then ask questions, will ask written questions. They can't talk, so it's going to be really hard for them. In fact, the senators are going to be kind of interesting because they're going to be sitting at their desks. They're not going to be able to have electronic devices, so no playing around on their cell phones. They're not going to be able to have any kind of laptop. They are not going to even be able to listen to music. They're going to have to sit there and pay attention to Adam Schiff talk for 6 hours on Wednesday and 6 hours again on Thursday, droning on and on. They can't ask questions. They have to just be quiet. So then they might get to vote if there's an objection to something that Schiff says, and there's a fight between the president's representatives, his team, and the Schiff team. There might be a vote. John Roberts would rule. The Senate could vote, and you'd get a sense of what's going to be allowed and what's not going to be allowed in the trial. But by and large, the senators are going to be sitting there. They're going to be watching the biggest. It's going to be the biggest circus since Ringling Brothers came to town, and they're not even going to have any popcorn.
Yeah, they won't have popcorn. Oh, that's not right. That is not right. Okay, moving on here. We'll call it the newly renegotiated NAFTA USMCA deal. Is it better for America? And I also got a message here from one of my friends who's in the community here, the farming community. She says because the countries weren't doing what they said, we want getting lower prices. We couldn't do anything about it. It should be a big deal if we get $1 a pound for our grain instead of 65 cents. This is an example. Same for a lot of commodities, cotton and corn. So she thinks that it could really help her, the newly really negotiated NAFTA. Do you think it's going to be good for Americans?
Oh, absolutely. I'll give you a couple of examples. First of all, agriculture will dramatically benefit agriculture. It'll benefit our auto industry in terms of these content requirement for foreign cars that are made in America was 65%. Under NAFTA, it'll be 75% under this deal, which means 10% more of the parts of a vehicle will have to be made here in America or in Mexico or in Canada. And so we're going to see assembly lines kicking up production. We're going to see new parts being demanded to be created here in America, in Canada, or Mexico
Yeah.
that were previously being imported from China and Japan and elsewhere, in Germany. And so we're going to see new parts manufacturers. We're going to see factories being retooled to accommodate that. So, and that means jobs. That means high-paying American automaker jobs, and it's going to be a real boon. In fact, they're saying that it's going to be 76,000 new auto jobs in this country created, and many of them are going to be created right off the bat because those content requirements are immediate requirements. So, if companies want to get zero tariffs as a domestically manufactured vehicle, they're going to have to include a lot more parts made in America, made in Canada, made in Mexico. And remember, the Mexicans are going to have to put a fixed $16 an hour wage for their auto workers. So the labor incentive to build cars and build parts in Mexico is going to be significantly diminished, meaning that they're going to drive those things to the more reliable countries of the U.S. and Canada. So I think it's going to have a huge impact. It may have an immediate stimulus impact, not to mention the fact that, as your friend said, it's going to force the Mexicans to not manipulate currency. So they will be able. So there will be an even on par currency rating. So American farmers are going to get a dollar for a dollar as opposed to 65 cents on a dollar. So this is a great deal for America. It's a great deal for our economy. And quite honestly, it's a great deal for all three countries. Most people don't realize 34% of our trade around the world is with Canada and Mexico.
Yeah.
34%. That's one third of our trade is with Canada and Mexico. And so anything that increases that, anything that helps that trade between our two closest neighbors to benefit and to grow is a good thing.
Yeah, yeah. I once heard it's $1 billion a day, probably over $1 billion a day, back and forth between the borders. Now, the ag community. I'm actually located in Texas right now. The ag community here has been hurt somewhat in the last year and a half or so. But in places like the Midwest, there's reports of bankruptcies or a lot of USDA bailouts of farmers who've had bad years. Now that goes away. So we can't hear people complaining about that anymore. That goes away.
Well, yeah. What happens? That's partially USMCA. It's also partially the China deal. What most people don't realize, we had a lot of focus on soybean farmers, early last year, mid last year, and for good reason. The Chinese had agreed to purchase a certain amount of soybeans, U.S. soybeans, and they reneged on that agreement, and they purchased Brazilian soybeans instead, leaving our soybean farmers without a market. And so there was some real problems in terms of those farmers who had grown those soybeans with an understanding that they had a purchaser, and the purchaser went away. The U.S. has a program under the U.S. Department of Agriculture where they're allowed to fund up to $14 billion of farm goods when they're being undercut or where somebody reneges on an agreement, as China did. And as a result of that, many of those farmers were made whole, or at least were not hurt as badly because they were able to get subsidies. And those subsidies, America's Federal government doesn't support subsidies. But let me be clear: if subsidy occurs because we're trying to defend our national interests against somebody who's gone to economic war against us, then that's a perfectly valid measure, defense measure, so we can't be coerced by foreign trade partners trying to manipulate us. So that's what happened. And then once the trade talk between China and the U.S. picked up in November of 2019, one of the big unreported things is that the Chinese bought more soybeans than they had virtually any time in history. And in fact, at the end of 2019, more U.S. soybeans were exported to China than had been exported in the previous year. So the soybean farmers should do really well. They made it up in late 2019, should do really well in 2020, assuming China keeps their deal. Plus, we have additional agricultural deals with Japan and South Korea. So we're going to be selling a lot of other ag products to Japan and South Korea. So cattlemen should be doing really well with China and Mexico, the USMCA, and basically anybody. We know a lot of the poultry farmers are doing really well. In fact, there was a big story about how we sold millions of pounds of chicken feet to China. And I'm sorry, but it never occurred to me that anybody would buy chicken feet, but apparently the Chinese like to fry them up and eat them. So we've sold chicken feet to China. And and we sold rice to China. So we're now selling rice to China. That's like selling ice to Eskimos. So it's a pretty amazing thing. The president is one of the great salesmen for America, and and the agriculture industry should be much stronger as a result.
Yeah, yeah. I remember hearing some of these stories about how Japan and Korea are being opened up, and I dealt with some of the farmers down here as a reporter, and they were eager to open those up as markets. We also had some places like Indonesia and Malaysia were sending representatives down here. That was good news. But yes, you're right. We're now selling rice to China. Next thing we'll be selling is tea. We'll be selling tea to China.
He's selling tea
Okay.
to China. They like the Bigelows. I hear they like the Bigelows and the Liptons, so they're going to go. We'll start exporting that anytime now.
Did you ever think anyone would ever make China bow to us? I mean, China's just such a massive, ancient nation, tons of people, an incredibly powerful communist party there, and he's making them bow to us. It's just incredible.
Well,
Incredible.
I think that what happens, there's this confluence of events. Number one, China thought they'd won. At the end of the Obama administration, they were calling the shots. And they totally misjudged Donald Trump as being a different kind of president. They believed they could control the U.S. system by working with their partners or business partners in our multinational communities to try to stop things like tariffs. Never occurred to them that this president would use tariffs in a way to change supply chains and reduce our reliance on China. And as a result, they really ran into a buzzsaw. Now, I don't know that this battle is a long-term battle. This is not, this is like round one of a 15 round fight. But round one was a 10-8 victory for Trump and for America. The question is, will we keep fighting or will we let down our guard and think we can go back to business as usual? Because business as usual benefits the Chinese.
Probably, well, not the laborers, not the Chinese laborers, the Communist
Well,
Party.
no,
Yeah.
I'm saying China as a whole. No, let's be clear. There is no more immoral country in the world than China. When you buy a plastic toy from China, the chances are that toy was made by a little kid about this age of your child who was working in a factory 12, 15 hours a day with no wages, making those products. We have the Department of Labor puts out a list of items that are made from child or slave labor. And China is one of the worst abusers, according to that U.S. Department of Labor list. Everything from toys to electronics are covered under it. So that when you buy Chinese goods, chances are you're buying goods that are made by slave labor. And make no mistake about it. And the people of China the middle class in China has grown, but the truth is they have grown on the backs of millions upon millions upon millions of people who were operating in slavery in conditions that are unimaginable. Let me tell you another thing they do that's just sickening. And this comes from Rob Spalding, who wrote a book on China and was at the National Security Council and is a really smart guy and he's spent a lot of time in China during his career. Rob writes and has told me personally that the Chinese, you can make reservations in China for body parts. If you need to get a kidney transplant, you can make reservations. And the reason, normally here you have to wait. If somebody dies, and they bring the kidney out of the dead body, and they transfer it over to the person who needs the kidney. Well, in China they don't do that. In China, they keep people alive. They keep people alive and they take their body parts from live human beings for transplants. So you can schedule your transplants in China because there's live human beings, like in the book Coma or in movie Coma, who are hanging, literally being kept alive, blood being coursed through them in a way that makes it so you get fresh organs, but it's evil to its core. It is evil to its core. That's China.
I also, in my career, I did do a report on China. And one of the other things they were doing is taking political dissidents or people who were in prison and executing them for their organs and selling their organs and disposing of them like, we would dispose of a bag of trash.
Yeah, their human
So,
life
yeah.
has no value in China. So, they had the one child policy where they were if you had the and in China from a tradition standpoint, having a male heir is extremely important. And so the one child policy effectively wiped out a generation of females in China. It's why they've got 75 of people who are marriage age and family age. They've got 75 million more Chinese males than females because the females were killed, were aborted, or killed on the table because the parents said, "I need to have a male to carry on my name." That's the truth of China. The massive genocide against and wiping out a whole generation of females. That's China.
Worth abortion. I've heard those. I've seen those
Absolutely.
too. Now, another thing, the Second Amendment is back up in the news again. That one just doesn't seem to want to go away. Gun rights advocates want to speak out. And again, the left, the media, the academics, the liberal politicians, they make it out like these people are barbarians.
Well, Frank, one thing you may not know, and listeners may not know, and viewers might not know, but I was an NRA lobbyist, National Rifle Association state lobbyist, for 9 years, back in the ancient days, and when I was a younger man. And the and what's happening in Virginia, in the Commonwealth of Virginia right now, where the Democrats take control with a narrow majority, and then they try to shove through the most draconian left-wing policies, including banning guns, and it creates a reaction. In New Jersey, 30 years ago, the same thing happened. The Democrats took control of the House, they took control of the Senate, and they got the governorship. And even though they only had a 3-vote majority in the Senate, 4-vote majority in the House, they jammed through a semi-auto ban that was in fact a confiscation bill. And so they jammed it through. We fought like crazy, and the reality was that they were doing so with a they were doing so in spite of massive rallies at the State House. We had 8,000 people turn out on a weekday in the State House with absolutely pre-email communication, pre-texting, pre-Twitter, using telephone trees. We got 8,000 people to show up, take a day off of work and show up at the state capitol when the notification went out on a late Thursday, and the vote was on a Monday. So yeah, these rallies matter. I will tell you, the people who come to these rallies are salt of the earth Americans. They're not people you need to be afraid of at all. They're great people who believe in America and believe in our rights, believe in a system of laws and protections, and that our Bill of Rights was handed down. Their rights are guaranteed by God. When the Declaration of Independence says all men are created equal, endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, among these life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, here's what it means. It means that God gave these rights. It's not a government, not government. Rights don't come from government, they come from God. And it means that a government can't take away those rights. It's a positional thing. If God is giving those rights, then man, individual people have those rights, and it isn't the government's job or even ability or in their purview to be able to take those rights away. The government is then subservient to the individual, as opposed to the way Ralph Northam, the governor of Virginia, wants it to be, where the government, the people are subservient to the government. That's what this fight's about. It's about whether or not we're going to have freedom, and whether individuals' rights or supersede the governmental powers. And the truth is, Virginia has a Second Amendment in their state constitution, which should prevent any actions by the governor that are way over the top. And we have the Heller decision in the Supreme Court that says that that individual rights are an individual right, not a collective right. And so they have both. If the Commonwealth of Virginia goes totally wild, legally, both the state courts and the federal courts should be able to dispense with those laws. But Frank, the main point is, in Virginia, they had a narrow majority created in the House and in their House of Delegates and the Senate. They have a Democrat governor, and the minute they got the opportunity to have control, the first thing they went after was fundamental freedoms of Virginians. Just like in New Jersey, the first thing they went after were the fundamental freedoms of the people of New Jersey. That's where they are. And once they get control, they don't do. They always say, "Oh, well, we don't really mean to do this." You're silly when you talk about confiscation. We just want to do these little things. No, when they get control, they confiscate guns. That's what they do. That's who they are. And this shows once again that once the people who want to take away your guns get power, they don't care about small steps. They go for the gusto and they attempt to eliminate your firearm rights. And once they get out of power, it is extremely difficult to reverse course.
Speaking of China, there's another thing. Who gets the guns in China? The government, and they get really nice guns.
And lots of them.
And lots of them, and they're not afraid to point them and fire at their people if need be. Now, the thing is, these gun permit sale, the amount of permits being turned in the county government offices are probably going up now in Virginia because people fearing that they lose their rights, their gun rights. And I remember a few years ago, I called up our old friend Catherine Mortensen at the NRA to help us with the story that I was working on that. And she said that during the Obama era, the membership of the NRA had gone up, about the same amount as the amount of gun permits that were being turned in, gun permit applications that were being turned into the counties. And I think it was up at about 1 million during his time in office, and this was probably 2015. Maybe the NRA is going to be a little bit more active now and say, "Hey, sign up. We got to fight for these rights."
One of the ironies in Virginia is that Mike Bloomberg personally spent more money in Virginia elections than the NRA spent in the Virginia elections, because Mike Bloomberg has more money than the NRA. So it's one of the interesting things is, collectively people can get together. They should join. They can join the group like the NRA. They can give money and to fight back. But understand, this is the main thing that people needed to do in Virginia back in the last election is make certain that the Democrats didn't win. And I'm not saying this from a partisan level. I'm saying this from a practical level. The Democrats winning in that election is why you have what you've got going on right now. And hopefully people will remember that lesson. The interesting question will be, on a national level, is a lot of the left has slated Virginia as being a blue state now. They haven't voted for a Republican in like 12 years for president. So so they're thinking that Virginia is now a blue state. The question is, Well, all of those people who weren't voting, weren't registered, who are upset right now at this governor, will they get registered and make certain they vote in 2020? Because if they do, Virginia will not be a blue state. Virginia will be a red state, and it will be one of the states that President Trump carries to victory in 2020.
It's a question of turnout. I would have to agree with you. I also think that's the case in Pennsylvania. Now, you probably remember in 2012, when I was still with you guys full time, we had Mitt Romney was nominated for president. He kept doing all the stops in Virginia. And that probably wasn't, in hindsight, that was probably a very poor decision to make. He probably should have been spending all those campaign trips in Florida, but he spent them all in Virginia. And that is because I think his staff said, wait, that state's going purple, it could go blue. We need to get turnout there. We need to get you getting the red districts out.
Well, there was a belief that in Northern Virginia, particularly the suburbs of farther out suburbs of Northern Virginia, that there was a core cadre of Republicans, and that Romney, who appealed to more moderate Republicans, would be able to reach those people in a way that, quite honestly, perhaps Donald Trump can't. And what happened is Mitt Romney he got blown out in Virginia. He didn't win.
Yeah.
Because, ultimately, we're seeing a transformation, a political transformation, and people, the last people who actually recognize this stuff are the people who get paid a lot of money to do political ads and stuff like that, because they're always stuck in their same model that occurred. The truth is, we have a political transformation in the country that's really where we're going to have to. People who believe in freedom are going to have to change our messaging to women in suburban areas. We're going to have to be more aggressive in delivering messaging, and that messaging has to be one on security. It has to be on issues that they care about, because those women have largely been marginalized along the lines of the abortion issue. And I believe personally, and I'm not a woman, but I've talked to a few, that there is when you get down to it, concerns about the family, concerns about the lack of quality education, concerns about the standard of living, concerns about whether or not they're able to get a job. All those things are going to begin to matter more and more, and as they do, for millennial women in particular, as they do, I think we'll see a transformation back to a model where people who are doing well, or doing moderately well, or aspire to do well, will be voting Republican.
Yeah, it does. A lot of that has to do with turnout. Though. I really think a lot of that has to do with turnout. Who can you get to get out to the? Who can you get out to the polls to vote?
That's absolutely true. That's absolutely true.
That seems to be the big question, and that's actually on both sides.
Well, and Frank, along those lines, one of the measures of turnout is typically intensity. And we just had a women's march on DC, which in previous years, in 2017, when the president was first inaugurated 3 years ago, they had a 500,000 people here on the grounds here in DC at the Capitol. And this year they had it, and 3 years later. And from an intensity standpoint, understand this is where they're at. They had less than 10,000 people show up. So the intensity on the left has dramatically diminished. Think about it. You had women 500,000 women showed up, and they were determined to get Trump out of office. They had this march on Washington called for today, or yesterday rather, and it was on the eve of an impeachment trial, and they got 10,000 people, only 10,000 people, in an area where only in DC, Donald Trump got 4% of the vote. 4%. Okay. So and so in Northern Virginia, Donald Trump got about 30% of the vote, a little over that. In Maryland, Donald Trump got 35%. So the surrounding areas are all filled with people who voted for Hillary Clinton, didn't support Trump yet. They couldn't draw flies this weekend at their women's march. And that tells you a lot about the intensity of those who oppose President Trump. It's become more radicalized, but a lot fewer. people.
Yeah, a lot of that has to do with the fact that he's had a good performance as president.
Let's hope so.
Okay, just wanted to move on to something a little bit lighter. The Super Bowl now set. It's the 49ers and the Kansas City Chiefs.
Yep.
I'm going to have to say it just feels, I feel it in my bones. It's a Chiefs year. I think they're going to take it. Your prediction?
Well, as you know, I'm from California, and don't hold that against me. But I will tell you, it's I can't see the. I'm gonna go with the team that's in Middle America against the team that's in deep blue state America. I cannot bring myself to, in any way, shape, or form, be associated, even in a prediction, with a team in San Francisco or from San Francisco. And so, given that, I'm going to go. This is no analysis in terms of football. I could do that too, but the reality is politically, I'm rooting for the Chiefs just because I don't want to see a parade where everybody has to kind of dodge the human excrement that's all over the streets of San Francisco. It would be a really, really kind of gross parade. So if you're going to have a parade somewhere for a Super Bowl champion, let's have it in a place where at least they keep the human feces off the streets.
Oh, good Lord. Now, one more question. This is something I've wondered. Can Joe Montana, who played the final 2 years of his career and had some success with the Kansas City Chiefs, fully, fully, fully support the 49ers? Are there going to be Chiefs fans who will demand at least part of his loyalty?
Well, Chiefs fans might, but Joe Montana has 4 rings, and they're all from San Francisco. He is not going to. He's going to be going there with his 4 rings, and his 4 rings are going to all say SF on them. So there is no way that Joe Montana represents for Kansas City at all. Although I'm sure he'll use this as a means to get a lot of exposure. But it's truth is, I don't think anybody associates Joe Montana with the Kansas City Chiefs, except for some people who watched them 30 years ago, and and it would be foolish to assume that he would be actually pushing a Chiefs agenda. Bottom line is Chiefs haven't been to the Super Bowl in 50 years since Len Dawson led them. Len Dawson is the quarterback icon for the Kansas City Chiefs, not Joe Montana. On the San Francisco side, Joe Montana is their quarterback icon. So, when push comes to shove, I think Joe Montana will be firmly on the San Francisco sidelines. And since Dwight Clark isn't playing for the 49ers anymore, I predict the Chiefs will win, and they'll win quite handily.
Sure. I just looked up. Len Dawson is still alive. He's 84 years old.
Good.
Maybe he'll shoot the game. I don't know if he can
They had
make
a great
that
team. Buck Buchanan, Len Dawson. It was a great team. I think even I think Mike Garrett was a running back. At least he was in Super Bowl I. I don't know if he was in Super Bowl III. So that's your. So there's a lot of there's people still around from 50 years ago, and it'll be a great reunion. And quite honestly, I like seeing the small market towns do well, and seeing the Kansas City Chiefs doing as well as they do. It's a good thing because even though the NFL is kind of equalizes the pay formulas, you really want a team where the fans, those fans sit out in really cold weather and are really loud. So I'd like to see them being rewarded with a Super Bowl champion.
That would certainly be very nice to see something new, and not the Patriots again. We're also happy it's not the Patriots again this year. We're so sick of the Patriots.
I have to tell you, Frank, I was kind of disappointed that Aaron Rodgers lost, even though I'm not a big Aaron Rodgers fan. He went to Cal, I went to USC, but not a big Aaron Rodgers fan. But the fact is, I really wanted another old guy quarterback. I wanted one last run of old guy quarterbacks in the Super Bowl because with the Garoppolo against Mahomes, we've got the next generation of quarterbacks in the forefront, and it looks like we've got a generational transition to quarterbacks who are more mobile and more dynamic. Between when you look at what happened in Baltimore with Lamar Jackson, you look at the new model, and it appears to be a quarterback that moves around as a threat with his feet has become and can survive hits is the new wave in the NFL, and Kansas City showcases that with a kid who I remember when his dad was playing baseball. So it's really a changing of the guard in a lot of ways, and the NFL needs fresh new blood to stay alive. Now, quite honestly, I don't watch much NFL since they decided to be stupid and go from supporting having flyovers with our servicemen to protesting our country. But
Yeah.
so I don't really watch them all that much anymore. But I think a changing of the guard does them well. And if I were the NFL marketing department, I couldn't have planned any better. Not to say that they did.
All right. Well, I think it's time to wrap it up here. We've gone about 45 minutes. It's been fun, and we're going to keep doing this. I think we have some upgrades that we're going to be making, and this was a good first run. But now we've got an impeachment to put our eyes on, and then a caucus and a primary to keep our eye on after that. So
Yeah, I would expect us doing a couple. Just so people know, I would expect us to do a couple of maybe one or two pithy, kind of short, much shorter reports about what's happening on impeachment over the next week.
yeah,
I will be down on Capitol Hill for part of the time, working out of a kind of a command communication center, and for at least part of the time this upcoming week, and we'll see what happens from there. But you'll be getting the latest information. Keep track of our Twitter account at Limit Government, at Limit GOVT. Also, keep track of this YouTube channel because we'll have the latest up there, as well as going to getting dailytorch.com and our Facebook page. So we'll be all over impeachment for the next week to 10 days or however long it lasts. And for the best and most interesting and fastest information, just pay attention to Americans for Limited Government.
and please subscribe.
Please subscribe to this YouTube channel. And truthfully, the more subscriptions, the better able we're able to monetarily justify pushing this out there. So subscribe, and you will see more and greater content as much as you want to get. So thank you all for listening and watching, and we will catch you on the rebound.